Two Concepts of Liberty by Isaac Berlin. Human never disagreed about the ends of life. If our ancestors had remained undisturbed in the Garden of Eden, the study to which the Giudicelli Chair of Social Political Theory is dedicated could scarcely have been conceived, for this study springs from the thrive on discord. So I may question this on the ground that even in the society of essentially anarchists, where no conflict about ultimate purpose can take place, political problems, for example, constitutional or legislative issues, might still arise. But this objection rests on a mistake. Where ends agreed, the only questions left are those of means, and this is not political, but technical, that is to say, capable of being settled by experts or machines, like an argument between engineers or doctors. That is why those who put their faith in some immense or transforming phenomenon, like the final triumph of reason or the proletarian revolution, must believe that all political and moral problems can thereby be turned into technological ones. That is the meaning of Saint Simon's famous phrase about replacing government persons by the administration of things. And the Marxist prophecies about the withering away of the state and the beginning of the true history of humanity. This outlook is called utopian by those for whom speculation about this condition perfect social harmony is a play of idle fancy. Nevertheless, visit from Mars to any British or American university today, my purpose will be forgiven if he sustains the impression that its members live in something very like this innocent and idyllic state for all the serious attention that they pay to fundamental problems of politics by professional philosophers. Yet this is both surprising and dangerous. Surprising because there has perhaps been no time in modern history when so large a number of human beings, both in the East and the West, have had their notions, indeed their lives, so deeply altered, in some cases violently upset, by fanatically held social and political doctrines. Dangerous because when ideas are neglected by those who ought to attend to them, that is to say, those who have been trained to think critically about ideas, they sometimes acquire an unchecked momentum and irresistible power over a multitude of men that may grow too violent to be affected by rational criticism. 100 years ago, the German poet Heine warned the French not to underestimate the power of ideas. Philosophical concept nurtured in the stillness of a professor's study could destroy civilization. It spoke of Kant's critics of pure reason as a sword with which European deism had been decapitated, and described the works of Rousseau as a blood-stained weapon which, in the hands of Robespierre, had destroyed the whole old regime, and prophesied that the romantic faith of Fichte and Schelling would one day be turned with terrible effect by the fanatical German followers against the liberal culture of the West. The facts have not wholly belied this prediction, but if Professor can truly wield this phantom power, then it will be that only other professors and at least other thinkers, and not governments or congressional committees, can alone disarm them. Our philosophers seem oddly unaware of these devastating effects of their activities. and be then intoxicated by their magnificent achievements in more abstract realms, the best among them look with disdain upon a field which radical discoveries are less likely to be made, and talent for immediate analysis is less likely to be rewarded. And despite every effort to separate them, conducted by blind scholastic pedantry, politics has remained indissolubly intertwined with every other form of philosophical inquiry. To neglect the field of political thought because its unstable subject matter, with blurred edges to be caught by the thick concepts, abstract models, and the fine instruments suitable to logic and to linguistic analysis, to demand the unity of a method in philosophy and reject whatever the method cannot successfully manage, is merely to allow oneself to remain at the mercy of primitive and uncriticized political beliefs. It's only a very vulgar historical materialism that denies the powerful ideas and sees that ideas are mere material interests in disguise, and without the pressure of social forces, political ideas are still born. What is certain is that these forces, unless they clothe themselves in ideas, remain blind and undirected. The truth has been escaped every Oxford teacher, even in our own day. It is because he has granted the importance of this truth has not escaped every Oxford teacher, even in our day. It is because he has granted the importance of political idea in theory and practice, and dedicated his life to their analysis and propagation. And the first holder of this chair had made so great impact upon the world in which he has laid the name Douglas Cole in know wherever men have political or social issues at heart. His fame extended far beyond the confines of this university and the country. A political thinker of complete independence, honesty, and courage, a writer speaker for extraordinary lucidity and eloquence, a poet and a novelist, a uniquely gifted teacher and amateur the ideas, he is, in the first place, a man who has given his life to the fairly support principles not always popular, and to the unswerving and passionate defense of justice and truth, often in circumstances of great difficulty and discouragement. These are the qualities for which this most generous and imaginative English socialist is today chiefly known to the world. Not the least remarkable, perhaps the most characteristic facts about him is that he has achieved this public position without sacrificing his natural humanity, his spontaneity of feeling, his inexhaustible personal goodness, and above all, his deep and scrupulous devotion, a devotion reinforced by many-sided learning and a fabulous memory to his vocation as a teacher of anyone who wishes to learn. It is a source of deep pleasure and pride to me to attempt to put on record that what I and many others feel about this great Oxford figure, whose moral and intellectual character is an asset to his country and to the cause of justice and human equality everywhere. It is from him, at least as much from his writing, that many members of my generation and Oxford have learned that political theory is a branch of moral philosophy which starts from the discovery or application of moral notions in the sphere of political relations. I don't mean, as I think some idealist philosopher may have believed, that all historical movements or conflicts between human beings are reducible to movements or conflicts, ideas, or spiritual forces, nor even that they are effects or aspects of them, but I do mean, and I do not think that Professor Cole would disagree, then to understand such movements of conflict is above all to understand the ideas or attitudes to life involved in them, which alone make such movements a part of human history and not mere natural events. Political words, notions, and acts are not intelligible save in the context of the ensues, and divide the men who use them. Consequently, our own attitudes and activities are likely to remain obscure to us unless we understand the dominant issues of our own world. The greatest is the open war that had been fought between two systems of ideas which return different and conflicting answers to what has long been the central question in politics, the question of obedience and coercion. Why should I or anyone obey anyone else? Why should I not live as I like? Must I obey? If I disobey, may I be coerced? By whom? And to what degree? In the name of what and for the sake of what? Upon the answers to the question of the permissible limits of coercion, opposed views are held in the world today, each claiming the allegiance of very large numbers of men. It seems to me, therefore, that in any aspect this seems worthy of examination. 1. To coerce a man is to deprive him of freedom. Freedom from what? Almost every moralist in human history has praised freedom, like happiness and goodness, like nature and reality. The meaning of this term is employers that there is a little interpretation than it seems able to resist. I do not propose to discuss either the history or the more than 200 senses of this protein word recorded by historians of ideas. I propose to examine no more than two of these senses, those central ones with a great deal of human history behind them, and I dare say still to come. The first is political sense of freedom or liberty. I shall use both words to mean the same, which following much precedent I shall call the negative sense, is involved in the answer to the question what the area within which a subject or person or group of persons is or should be left to do and be what he is able to do or be without interference by other persons. The second, which I shall call the positive sense, is involved in the answer to the question what or who is the source of control or interference that it can determine someone to do or be this rather than that. Rather be this rather than that. The two questions are clearly different, even though the answers to them may overlap. The notion of negative freedom. I am normally said to be free to the degree to which no man or body of a man interferes with my activity. Political liberty, in this sense, is simply the idea within which a man can act unobstructed by others. If I am prevented by others from doing what I could otherwise do, I am to that degree unfree. If this area is contracted by other men beyond a certain minimum, I can be described as being coerced, or it may be enslaved. Coercion is not, however, a term that covers every form of inability. You will see that I am unable to jump more than 10 feet in the air, or can't read because I'm blind, or can't understand the dark pages of Hegel. It would be incentric to say that I am to that degree enslaved or coerced. Coercion implies the deliberate interference of other human beings within the idea in which I could otherwise act. You lack political liberty or freedom only if you are prevented from attaining a goal by human beings. Mere incapacity to attain a goal is not lack of political freedom. It's brought out by the use of such modern expressions as economic freedom and its counterpart, economic slavery. It is argued, very plausibly, that if a man is too poor to afford something on which there's no legal ban, a loaf of bread, a journey around the world, recourse to the law courts is a little free to have it as he would be if it were forbidden him by law. If my poverty were a kind of disease which prevented me from buying bread or paying for the journey around the world or getting my case heard, as lameness prevents me from running, this inability will not naturally be described as lack of freedom, least of all political freedom. It's only because I believe that my inability to get a given thing due to the fact that other human beings have made arrangement whereby I am, whereas others are not, prevented from having enough money with which to pay for it, that I think myself a victim of coercion or slavery. In other words, this use of the term depends on the particular social and economic theory about the causes of my poverty or weakness. And my lack of material means is due to my lack of mental or physical capacity, then I begin to speaking of being deprived of freedom, and not simply about the poverty, only if I accept the theory. If in addition I believe that I am being kept in want by a specific arrangement, which I consider unjust or unfair, I speak of economic slavery or oppression. The nature of things does not mandate us, only your will does, said Rousseau. The criterion of oppression is the part that I believe to be played by other human beings, directly or indirectly, with or without the intention of doing so, in frustrating my wishes. By being free in this sense, I mean not being interfered with by others. The wider the area for non-interference, the wider my freedom. This is what the classical English political philosopher meant when they used this word. They disagreed about how wide the area could or should be. They supposed that it could not, and things were, be unlimited, because if it were, it would entail a state in which all men could boundless interfere with other men. This kind of natural freedom would lead to social chaos in which man's minimal needs would not be satisfied, or else the liberty of the weak would be suppressed by the strong, because they perceive that the human purposes acted do not automatically harmonize with one another, because whatever the official doctrines, they put a high value on other goals, such as justice, or happiness, or culture, or security, or varying degrees of equality. They have prepared to curtail freedom in the interest of other values, and indeed of freedom itself. For without this, it was impossible to create the kind of associations that they thought desirable. Consequently, it is assumed by these thinkers that the area of man's free action must be limited by law. But equally, it is assumed, especially by such libertarians and Locke, Mill, England, the Constant, Tocqueville in France, that there ought to exist a certain minimum area of personal freedom which must be on no account be violated. For if it is overstepped, the individual find himself in an area too narrow for even that minimal development of the natural faculties which alone make it possible to pursue, and even to conceive, the various ends which men hold good or right or secret. It follows that a frontier must be drawn between the area of private life and that of public authority. Where is it to be drawn is a matter for argument, indeed, of Hegel. Men are largely interdependent. No man's activity is so completely private and never to obstruct the lives of others in any way. Freedom for the pike is death for the minnows. The liberty of some must depend on the restraint of others. Freedom for the Oxford dumb, others have been known to add, is a very different thing from freedom for an Egyptian peasant. This proportion derives a force from something that is both true and important. But the phrase itself remains a piece of political claptrap. It's true that to offer political rights to safeguards against intervention by the state, to men who are half naked, illiterate, underfed, and diseased, it'll mock the condition. They need medical help or education before they can understand or make use of an increase in their freedom. What is freedom to those who cannot make use of it? Without adequate conditions for the use of freedom, what is the value of freedom? First things come first. There are situations, and the 19th century Russian radical writer declared, in which both are superior to the works of Shakespeare. Individual freedom is not everyone's primary need, for freedom is not the mere absence of frustration of whatever kind that would inflate the meaning of the word until it meant too much or too little. Egyptian peasant needs clothes or medicine before and more than that, and more than personal liberty. But the minimal freedom he needs today and the greater degree of freedom that he may need tomorrow is not the same species of freedom peculiar to him, but identical with that of professors, artists, and millionaires. What troubles the consciences for Western liberals is not the thing they believe that the freedom the man seeks differs according to their social or economic conditions, but the minority who possess it have gained it by exploiting or at least averting the gaze from the vast majority who do not. They believe with good reason that if individual liberty is an ultimate end for human beings, none should be deprived of it by others, least of all that some should enjoy it at the expense of others. Equality of liberty, not treat others as I should wish them to treat me, repayment my debt to those who alone have made possible my liberty, or prosperity, or enlightenment, justice in its simplest and most universal sense. These are the foundations of liberal morality. Liberty is not the only goal of man. I can, like the Russian critic Blensky says, if others are to be deprived of it, if my brothers are to remain in poverty, squalor, and chains, and I do not want it for myself. I reject it with both hands and infinitely prefer to share their fate. When nothing's gained but on Confucian terms, toward glaring inequality or widespread misery, I am ready to sacrifice some for all of my freedom. I may do so willingly and freely, but it is freedom that I am giving up for the sake of justice and or equality or the love of my fellow men. I should be guilt-stricken, and rightly so, if I were not, in some circumstances, ready to make this sacrifice. But the sacrifice is not an increase in what is being sacrificed, namely freedom, however great the moral need, or the compensation for it. Everything is what it is. Liberty is a liberty. Non-equality or fairness or justice or culture of human happiness, all human happiness on a quiet conscience. If the liberty of myself or my class or nation depends on the misery of a number of other human beings, the system which promotes this is unjust and immoral. But if I curtail or lose my freedom in order to lessen the shame of such inequality, I do not thereby materially increase individual liberty for others, as the loss of liberty occurs. This may be compensated for but again in injustice, and in happiness or in peace, but the loss remains. It is a confusion value to say that although my liberal individual freedom may go by the board, some other kind of freedom, social or economic, is increased. Yet it remains true that the freedom of some must be and time be curtailed to secure the freedom of others. Upon what principle should this be done? Freedom is a sacred, untouchable value. There can be no such principle. One or other of these conflicting rules or principles must, at any rate in practice, yield, not always for reasons which can be clearly stated, let alone generalize into rules or universal maxims. Still, a practical compromise has to be found. Philosophers with an optimistic view of human nature, a belief in the possibility of harmonized human interests, such as Locke, Adam Smith, and in some modes Mill, believe that social harmony and progress were compatible with the reserving a large area for private life, over which neither the state nor any other authority must be allowed to trespass. Hobbes, and those who agreed with him, especially conservative or reactionary thinkers, argue that if men were to be prevented from destroying one another and making social life a jungle or a wilderness, great safeguards must be instituted to keep them in their places, which correspondingly to increase the area of centralized control and decrease that of the individual. But both sides agree that some portion of human existence must remain independent of the sphere for social control. To we then perversity, however small, would be the despotism. The most eloquent of all defenders of freedom and privacy, Benjamin Constant, who had not forgotten the Jacobin dictatorship, declared that its wordless liberty for religion, opinion, expression, property must be guaranteed against arbitrary invasion. Jefferson, Burke, Paine, Mill compiled different catalogues of individual liberties. But the argument for keeping authority at bay is always substantially the same. We must preserve a minimal area for personal freedom if we are not to degrade or deny our nature. We can remain absolutely free and must give up some of our liberty to preserve the rest. But total self-surrender is self-defeating. Well, there must be the minimal B, that which a man cannot give up without offending against the essence of his human nature. What is this essence? What are the standards which it entails? This has been, and perhaps always will be, a matter for infinite debate. But whatever the principle in terms of which the area of non-interference is to be drawn, whether it's that of natural law or natural rights, or of futility of the pronouncements of a categorical imperative, of the sanctity of the social contract, or any other concept with which man has sought to clarify and justify the convictions, liberty, in this sense, means the liberty from absence of interference beyond the safety, but always recognizable frontier. The only freedom which deserves a name is that of pursuing our own good in our own way, to the most celebrated of its champions. If this is so, is a compulsion ever justified? Mill had no doubt that it was, since justice demands that all individuals be entitled to a minimum freedom, or other individual were of necessity to be restrained. It would need to be by force, from depriving anyone of it. Indeed, the whole function of law was the prevention of just such collisions. The state was reduced to what Lassalle contemporaneously described as the functions of a night watchman or traffic policeman. What made the protection of individual liberty so sacred to Mill? His famous essay declares that Unless men are left to live as they wish in the past which merely concerns themselves, civilization cannot advance. The truth will not, for lack of free marketing ideas, come to light. There will be no scope for spontaneity, originality, genius, for mental energy, for moral courage. Society will be crushed by the weight for collective mediocrity. Whatever is rich and diversified will be crushed by the weight of custom. But man's constant tendency to conformity, which breeds only withered capacities, pitched and hidebound, cramped and warped human beings. Pagan self-assertion is as worthy as Christian self-denial. All the errors which man is likely to commit against the wise and worthy are far outweighed by the evil of allowing others to constrain him to what they deem as good. The defense of liberty consists in the negative goal of warding off interference, to threaten man with persecution lest he submits to a life in which he exercises no choices as his goals, to block before him every door but one, no matter how noble the prospect upon which it opens. A whole benevolent motive of those who arrange this is to sin against the truth that he is a man. The being with life is only. This is liberty as it has been conceived by liberals in the modern world from the days of Erasmus, some would say of Occam, to our own. Every plea for civil liberties and individual fights, every protest against exploitation and humiliation, against encroachment of public authority, or the man's hypnosis of custom or organized propaganda, spring from this individualistic and much disputed conception of man. Three facts about this position may be noted. In the first place, Mill confused two distinct notions. One is that all coercion is, insofar as it frustrates human desires, banned as such, so it may have to be applied to prevent other greater evils, while a non-interference, which is the opposite of coercion, is good as such, although it is not the only good. This is the negative conception of liberty in its classical form. The other is that men should seek to discover the truth, or develop a central type of character which Mill approved: critical, original, imaginative, independent, not conforming to the point of eccentricity, and so on. And then truth can be found that such character can be bred only in conditions of freedom. Both these are liberal views, but they are not identical, and the connection between them is, at best, empirical. No one would argue that the truth of freedom, self-expression would flourish where dogma crushes all thoughts, but the evidence in history tends to show, as indeed was argued by James Stephen in his formidable attack on Mill in the Liberty, Equality, and Fraternity, that the integrity, loud truth, fierce individualism grew unless as often in severe disciplined communities, among, for example, the Puritan colonists of Scotland or New England, or under military discipline, as in more tolerant or indifferent societies. Yet this is so. Mill's argument for liberty as a necessary condition for the growth of human genius fell to the ground. If his two goals prove incompatible, Mill would be faced with a cruel dilemma, quite apart from the further difficulties created by his inconsistency of his doctrines with strict Unitarianism, even his own humane version of it. In the second place, doctrines are comparatively modern. There seems to be scarcely any discussion into the liberty as the conscious political idea, as opposed to its actual existence in the Asian world. Condorcet had already remarked that the notion of individual rights was absent from the legal conceptions of the Romans and Greeks. They seem to hold equally of the Jewish, Chinese, or the other Asian civilizations that have since come to light. The domination of this idea have been the exception rather than the rule, even in the recent history of the West. Nor has liberty in this sense often formed a rallying cry for the great masses of mankind. The desire not to be impinged upon, to be left to oneself, have been a mark of high civilization both on the part of individuals and communities. The sense of privacy itself, of the air of personal relationships as something sacred in its own right, derived from a conception of freedom which, for all its religious roots, is scarcely old. Its developed state and the Renaissance or the Reformation. Yet the decline would mark the death of a civilization or an entire moral outlook. The third characteristic of this notion of liberty is of great importance. It is that liberty, in this sense, is not incompatible with some kinds of autocracy, but at any rate with the absence of self-government. Liberty, in this sense, is principally concerned with electoral control, not with its source, thus as a democracy may, in fact, deprive the individual citizen of many liberties which he might have in some other form of society, so it is perfectly conceivable that the liberal-minded despot would allow his subjects to a large measure for personal freedom. The despot who leaves his subjects a wide area of liberty may be unjust or incurs lawless iniquities, care little for order or virtue or knowledge, but pride he does not curb the liberty, or unless curb it less than many other regimes, it meets with Mill's specification. Freedom in this sense is not, at any rate, logical, connected with democracy or self-government. Self-government may, on the whole, provide a better guarantee of the preservation of civil liberties than other regimes, and have been defended as such by libertarians. But there's no necessary connection between individual liberty and democratic rule. The answer to this question, who governs me, is logically distinct from the question, how far does the government interfere with me? It is this difference that the great contrast between the two concepts of negative and positive liberty in the end consists. For the positive sense of liberty comes to light. We try to answer the question not what am I free to do or be, but by who am I ruled, or who is to say who I am and what I am not to be or to do. The connection between democracy and individual liberty is a good deal more tenuous than it seems to many advocates of both. The desire to be governed by myself, and the right to participate in the process by which my life to be controlled, may be as deep a wish as that of a free area for action and perhaps historically older. But it's not desire for the same thing. So different is it, indeed, as to have led, in the end, to the great clash of ideologies that dominate our world. But it is this, the positive conception of liberty, not the freedom from, but the freedom to lead one prescribed form of life which the adherents of the negative notion represent as being at times no better than a specious disguise for brutal tyranny. 2. The notion of positive freedom. The positive sense of the word liberty derived from the wish on the part of the individual to be his own master, wish my life decision to depend on myself, not on external forces for whatever kind. I wish to be the instrument of my own, not of any man's act of will. I wish to be a subject, not object, to be moved by reasons, by conscious purposes which are my own, not by causes which affect me. It is word from outside. I wish to be somebody, not nobody, a doer, deciding, not being decided for, self-directed, not acted upon by external nature or by other men as if I were a thing, or an animal, or a slave incapable of playing a human role, that is, of conceiving goals and policies of my own, and realizing them. That is a part of what I mean when I say that I am rational and that It is my reason that it distinguishes me as a human being from the rest of the world. I wish above all to conscious of myself as a thinking, willing, active being, bearing responsibility for my choices, able to explain them by reference to my own ideas and purposes. I feel free to the degree that I believe this to be true, and enslaved to the degree that I am made to realize that it is not. The freedom which consists in being one's own master, and the freedom which consists in not being prevented from choosing as I do by other men, being on the face of it, same concept and no great logical distance from each other, no more than negative and positive ways of saying much the same thing. Yet the positive and negative notion of freedom historically developed in divergent directions, not always by logical, reputable steps, until in the end they came into direct conflict with each other. One way of making this clear is in terms of the independent momentum, which the initially pampers a quiet, harmless metaphor for self-mastery acquired. I am my own master. I'm a slave to no man. But may I not, and Plantonists or Hegelians tend to say, to be a slave to nature, or to my own unbridled passions? Are there not so many species of identical genus, slaves, some political or legal, others moral or spiritual? Has not man had the experience of liberty himself from spiritual slavery, or slavery to nature, or do they not in the course of it become aware on the one hand of a self which dominates, on the other of something in them which is brought to heel? This dominant self is inversely identified with the reason, with my higher nature, with the self which calculated and aims at what will satisfy it in the long run, with my real or idea or autonomous self, with myself at its best, which is in contrast with the irrational impulse, uncontrolled desires, my lower nature, the pursuit of immediate pleasures, my empirical or heteronomous self, swept by every gust of the desire and passion, needing to be rigidly disciplined if it is ever to rise to the full height of its real nature. Presently, the two selves may be represented by divided as an even larger gap. The real self may be considered something wider than the individual, as the term is normally understood, and the social whole of which the individual is an element or aspect, a tribe, a race, a church, a state, a great society, of the living and the dead, and the yet unborn, and the yet unborn. The entirety is then identified as being the true self, which, by imposing its eclectic or organic single will upon its recalcitrant members, achieved its own and therefore their higher freedom. The perils of using organic metaphors to justify the conversion of some men by others, in order to raise them to a higher level of freedom, have often been pointed out. But what gives such plausibility as it has to this kind of language is to recognize that it is possible, at the time justifiable, to coerce men in the name of some goal, let's say justice or public health, which they would, if they were more enlightened themselves, pursue, but do not, because they are blind or ignorant or corrupt. It rendered it easy for me to conceive myself as coercing others for their own sake, in their not my interest. I'm then claiming that I know what they truly need better than they know it themselves. What at most it entails that they would not resist me if they were rational and as wise as I, and understood their interests as I do. But I may go on to claim a good deal more than that, more than this. I may declare that they are actually aiming at what in their benign state the conscious resists, because there exists within them an all-called entity, the latent rational will, or their true purpose. And this entity, although it is believed by all that they overtly feel, do, and say, is the real self, of which the poor empirical self in space-time may know nothing or little, and this inner spirit is the only self that deserves to have its wishes taken into account. Once I take this view, I am in a position to ignore the actual wishes of man or society, to bully, oppress, torture them in the name and on behalf of the real selves, in the secure knowledge that whatever the true goal of man, happiness, performance of duty, wisdom, a just society, self-fulfillment, must be identical with the freedom. The free choice is the true, albeit often submerged, inarticulate self. This paradox has often been exposed. He wants him to see that I know what is good for X, while he himself does not, even to ignore his wishes for it and his sake, and a word different one to see that he has el epistle chosen it. Oh, not indeed consciously, not as he seems in everyday life, but his role as a rational self, which is empirical self, may not know the real self, which discerns the good, but cannot help choosing it once it is revealed. This monstrous impersonation, which consists in quitting what acts with the truth, if we're something he's not, at least not yet, with what acts actually seeks to choose, is at the heart of all political theories of self-realization. Wanting to see that I am maybe coerced by my own good, which I am too blind to say this may, on occasion, be for my benefit. Indeed, it may enlarge the scope of my liberty. It is not to see that it is my good, that I am not being coerced, for I have willed it, whether I know this or not, and I am free and truly free, even while my poor earthly body, foolish mind, bitterly reject it, and struggle against those who seek, however benevolently, to impose it with the greatest desperation. This magical transformation and sleight of hand, for which William James so justly mocked Hegelians, can no doubt be perpetuated just as easily with the natty concept of freedom, with a self that should not be interfered with, is no longer the individual which, with his actual wishes and needs, and they are normally conceived, but the real man within, identified with the pursuit of some ideal purposes, not dreamed of by his empirical self. And as in the case of the positively free self, the entirety may be inflated into some superpersonal entity, a state, a class, a nation, or the march of his self, regarded as a more real subject for attribute than the empirical self. But the positive conception freedom is a self-mastery, with the suggestion of a man divided against himself as, in fact, and as a matter for history of a doctrine and a practice, lend itself more easily to this splitting personality into two, the transcendent, dominant controller, and the empirical bundle of desires, a passion to be disciplined and brought to heel. It's this historical fact that has been influential. This demonstration is for demonstration for so obvious truth is needed, that the conceptions of freedom directly derive from views of what constitutes a self, a person, a man. Enough manipulation with the definition of a man, the freedom can be made to mean whatever the manipulator wishes, which has made only too clear that the issue is not merely academic. The consequences of distinguishing between two selves will become even clearer if one considers the two major forms which desire to be self-directed, directed by one's true self, as historically taken. The first, that of self-abnegation. Self-abnegation, I think that's it. That there is a typo here. Self-abnegation in order to attain independence. The second, that is self-realization, or total self-identification with the specific principal ideal in order to attain the self-same end. 3. The retreat to the inner citadel. I am the possessor of reason and the will. I conceive ends, and I desire to pursue them. But if I am prevented from attaining them, I no longer feel master of the situation. I may be prevented by the laws of nature or by accidents or the activities of men, or the effect often undesigned of human institutions. This forces me too much for me, maybe too much for me. What I'm to do to avoid being crushed by them? I must liberate myself from desire that I know I cannot realize. I wish to be master of my kingdom, but my frontier are long and insecure. Therefore, I contract them in order to reduce or limit the vulnerable area. I begin by desiring happiness, or power, or knowledge, or the attainment for some specific object. But I cannot command them. I choose to avoid defeat or waste, and therefore decide to strive for nothing that I cannot be sure to obtain. I determine myself not to desire what is unattainable. The tyrant threats me with the destruction of my property, with imprisonment, with exile or death of those I love. But if I no longer feel attached to property, no longer care whether or not I am in prison, if I have killed within myself my natural affections, then he cannot bend me to his will. But all that is left to me is no longer subject to empirical fears or desire. It is as if I perform a strategic retreat into an inner citadel. My reason, my soul, my noumenal self, which, do what they may, neither external blind force or human malice can touch. I withdraw to myself, therefore, there and there alone, I am secure. It is as if I were to say I have a wound in my leg. There are two methods of freeing myself from pain. One is to heal the wound, but the cure is too difficult or uncertain. There is another method. I can get rid of the wound by cutting off my leg. If I train myself on nothing to which the possession of my leg is indispensable, I shall not feel the lack of it. This is the traditional self-emancipation of ascetics and quietists, or Stoics, or Buddhist sages, men of various religions, all of now. We have fled the world to escape the yoke of society or public opinion by some process of deliberate self-transformation that enabled them to care no longer for any of its values, to remain isolated and independent on its edges, no longer vulnerable to its weapons. All political isolationism, all economic autarky, every form of autonomy have in it some element of this attitude. I limit the obstacles in my path, but abandon the path. I retreat into my own sect, my own planned economy, my own deliberately insulated territory, where no voices from outside need to be listened to, and no external forces can have effect. It's a form of the search for security, but it has also been called the search for personal or national freedom or independence. From this doctrine, as it applied to individuals, it is no very great distance to the conceptions for those who, like Kant, identify freedom not intended with the elimination desire, but with resistance to them and a control over them. I identify myself with the controller and escape the slavery of the controlled. I'm free because, insofar as I am autonomous, I obey laws, but I have imposed them on or found them in my own uncursed self. Freedom is obedience, but obedience to a law which we prescribe ourselves, and no man can enslave himself. Heteronomy is dependence on outside factors. Liability to be a plane of the external world, that I cannot myself fully control, which pro tanto controls and enslaves me. I'm free only to the degree to which my person is fettered by nothing but obeys forces over which I have no control. I cannot control the laws of nature. My free activity must therefore, ex hypothesis, be lifted above the empirical world of causality. This is not the place in which to discuss validity of this ancient and famous doctrine. I only wish to remark that the related notions of freedom is as resistant to or escape from unrealized desire and as independent of the sphere of causality have played a central role in politics no less than in ethics. For if the essence of man is that they are autonomous beings, authors, values, of ends in themselves, the ultimate authority in which consists precise in the fact that they are willed freely, then nothing is worse than to treat them as if they were not autonomous. A natural object played on by causal influences, creatures at the mercy of external stimuli, whose causes can be manipulated by the rulers, whether by threats of force or offers of reward. To treat men in this way is to treat them as if they were not self-determined. Nobody may compel me to be happy in his own way, said Kant. Paternalism is the greatest despotism imaginable. This is so because it is treating man as if they were not free, but human material for me, the benevolent reformer, to mold in accordance with my own, not their freely adopted purpose. This is, of course, precise the policy the early Unitarian recommended. Helvetius and Bethème believed not in resisting but in using man's tendency to be slaves to their passions, the wish to dangle rewards and punishment before man, the cutest possible form for heteronomy, if by this means the slave might be made happier. But to manipulate men, to pull them towards goals which you, the social reformer, see, but they may not, is to deny the human essence, to treat them as objects without wills of their own, and therefore to degrade them. This is why to lie to men, or to deceive them, that is, to use them as means for mine, not their own, independently conceived ends, as if it is for their own benefit, is in fact to treat them as a subhuman, to be here as if their ends are less ultimate, as sacred than my own. In the name, what can be never be justified in forcing men to do what they are not willed or consented to, only in the name of some value higher than themselves. But if, as Kant held, all values are made so by the free acts of men, and call values only so far as they are this, there is no value higher than the individual. Therefore, to do this is to coerce men in the name of something less ultimate than themselves, to bend them to my will, or to someone else's particular craving for his or their happiness, or expediency, or security, or convenience. I'm aiming at something desired from whatever motive, no matter how noble, by me or by my group, to which I am using other men as means. But this is a contradiction for which I know men to be, namely, ends in themselves, all forms of tampering with human beings, getting at them, shaping them against their will to your own pattern, all thoughts controlled, conditioning, is therefore a denial of that in man which makes them men and the values ultimate. Kant's free individual is a transcendent being, beyond the realm of natural causality, but in its empirical form, in which the notion of man is that of ordinary life, this doctrine was the heart of liberal humanism, both moral and political. That it was deeply influenced both by Kant, by Rousseau in the 18th century, its proprietor version, its proprietary version is a form of secularized Protestant individualism, in which the place God taken by the conception of the rational life, and the place of the individual soul, which strains towards union with Him, is replaced by the conception of the individual endowed with reason, straining to be governed by reason and reason alone, and depend upon nothing that might defect or delude him by engaging his irrational nature. Autonomy, not heteronomy, to act and not to be acted upon. The notion of slavery to the passion is, for those who think in these terms, more than a metaphor. To rid myself of fear, or love, or the desire to conform, is to liberate myself from the despotism of something which I cannot control. Sophocles, whom Plato reports as saying that old age alone had liberated him from the passion love, the yoke of a cruel master, reporting experience as real that of a liberation from a human tyrant or slave owner. The psychological experience of observing myself yielding to some lower impulse, ending from a motive that I dislike, while doing something which, at the very moment of doing, I may detest, reflecting later that I was not myself, or in control of myself when I did it, belong to this willful thinking and speaking, identify myself with my critical, irrational moments. Consequences of my acts cannot matter, for they are not in my control, only my motives are. This is to create the solitary thinker who has defiled the world and emancipated himself from the chains of manly things. In this form, the doctrine may seem primarily an ethical creed, and is scarcely political at all. Nevertheless, its political implications are clear. It is entering into the traditional liberal individualism, at least as deeply as the negative concept of freedom. It is worth remarking that in its individualistic form, the concept of the rational sage who has escaped into the inner fortress of his true self seems to arise when the external world has proved exceptionally arrayed, cruel, or unjust. He is truly free, said Rousseau, who desires what he can perform, does what he desires. In a world where the man seeks happiness, justice, or freedom in whatever sense, can do little because he found too many avenues of action blocked to him, and the temptation to withdraw in himself may become irresistible. It may have been so in Greece, where the Stoic ideal cannot be wholly unconnected with the fall of the independent democracies before centralized Macedonian autocracy. It was so in Rome, for ungodless reasons of the end of the Republic. It arose in Germany in the 17th century, during the period of the deepest national degradation of the German state that followed the 30 Years' War, of the character of public life, particularly in the small principalities, for those who prize the dignity of human life, not for the first or last time, into a kind of inner immigration. The doctrine that maintains that what I cannot have, I must teach myself not to desire. If the desire eliminated or unsuccessfully resisted is as good as desire satisfied. It's a sublime, but it seems to me unmistakable form of reduction of all soul griefs. What I cannot be sure of, I cannot truly want. This makes it clear why the definition of negative liberty as the ability to do what one wishes, which is, in fact, the definition adopted by Mill, will not do. If I found that I am able to do little or nothing, whatever I wish, I need only contract or extinguish my wishes, I am made free. If the tyrant or hidden persuader managed to condition his subjects or customers into losing the original wishes, internalize the former life he has invented for them, he will, on this definition, have succeeded in liberating them. He will no doubt have made them feel free as Epictetus feels freer than his master, and the proverbial good man said to feel happy on the rack. But what he has created is a word antithesis of political freedom. Aesthetic self-denial may be a source of integrity or serenity and a spiritual strength, but it is difficult to see how it can be called an enlargement of liberty. If I save myself from adversity by retreating indoors, locking every entrance and exit, I may remain freer than if I had been captured by him. But am I freer than if I had defeated or captured him? If I go too far, contract myself into too small space, I shall sophisticatedly die. The logical culmination of the process of destroying everything through which I can possibly be wounded is a suicide. While I exist in the natural world, I can never be wholly secure. Total liberation in this sense, as Schopenhauer correctly proceed, is conferred only by death. I find myself in a world in which I meet with obstacles to my will. Those who are wedded into the negative concept of freedom may perhaps be forgiven if they think that self-abnegation is not the only method of overcoming obstacles. It is also possible to do so by removing them. In the case of a non-human object, by physical action. In the case of a human resistance, by force or persuasion, as when I induce somebody to make room for me in the carriage or conquer a country which threatens the interests of my own. Such acts may be unjust. They mean war, violence, cruelty, the enslavement of others, but it can scarcely be denied. Thereby, the agent is able in the most liberal sense to increase his own freedom. It is irony of history that the truth is repeated by some of those who practice most forcefully, men who allow a conquer power and freedom action, reject the negative concept of it in favor of its opposite counterpart. The wheel rolls over half our world. Let us see upon what metaphysical foundation it rests. To be continued.